When Wolfram Wit was finally allowed to be performed on stage, multiple actresses refused to play Sofia because of her scandalous behavior. Alexander Griboyedov was born 17th of January 1795. Wait, hold on, that's not right. Is that really him? Because the thing is that the only portrait we have of Griboyedov was done by painter Kramskoy at the request of Tretyakov from that famous Tretyakov gallery, and it was done some odd 40 years after Griboyedov's death. Kramskoy used a verbal description of Griboyedov's appearance that was noted down, so it might not be that accurate. We have maybe 4 sketches of Griboyedov from his lifetime, and he looks completely different in all of them. So at the very least, this is artist's impression of Griboyedov. And actually, the date that I just gave you is also somewhat dubious. While the day and month are somewhat agreed on, the year is not. There are at least 3 different years that are listed for Griboyedov. 1795 is the official date, and that's the year that his mother cited, but it also makes him seem almost like a wonder child. Griboyedov himself later in life used 1790, most likely to age himself up to be eligible for promotions, or more scandalously, because his parents, they got married 1791, so if he was born 1790, that makes his position a little bit more precarious. But anyways, at some point, Alexander was born into a noble family to his parents, who were both named Griboyedov, although not related. The boy started showing his intelligence rather early on. He had a special aptitude towards foreign languages. At 6 years old, he already spoke English, French, and German. Then he also learned Italian, Latin, and ancient Greek. Later in his life or his career, he also learned Arab, Turkish, Georgian, and Iranian/Farsi. At Moscow University, he then studied law, philosophy, and politics. 1812, he volunteered for the army in order to fight in the Napoleonic Wars, but he quickly got injured, so he didn't get too much on Paris. He then spent 4 years in the military. 1816, he left the military path career and switched to the civil path, specifically in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, where his talents could be utilized more, especially his aptitude towards foreign languages. In his personal life, the company that he kept was not particularly stellar, though. He was part of the Freemasonry Society in St. Petersburg. The history of Freemasonry in Russia is rather complicated, and from what I understand, it could be as innocent as a way to meet new people. He also had a friend called Zavadovsky, a real rogue, and it's thanks to him that Griboyedov participated in the famous 4-way duel. Griboyedov was Zavadovsky's second, and he was expected to find Sheremetiyev's second, Yakubovich, but Sheremetyev was shot first, and they had to take him to the doctors. The duels in Russia were forbidden at the time, so as punishment, Griboyedov was sent on a diplomatic mission south to Persia, current-day Iran. In a weird twist of fate, on the way there, in Tbilisi, Griboyedov ran into Yakubovich, so they continued their duel there. Yakubovich shot first, and he actually shot off Griboyedov's little finger, and Griboyedov then missed. It was a mild injury, but due to it, Griboyedov had a problem with his great passion of his, piano. He was said to have been incredibly kind of talented with piano at improvising and composing. We now have 2 waltzes that were composed by Griboyedov. Later in life, Griboyedov learned to play with 9 fingers, but he obviously didn't get to the same level. In Tehran, Griboyedov found some success in his career under General Yermolov, and he was highly regarded by his Persian counterparts, but he always craved for the return to Russia. He managed to temporarily leave his assignment in 1823, and he spent some time in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and in the country. That's when Wolfram Wit was born. Woe is not his first work, not even his first play. Earlier in life, under the guidance of a famous playwright Chadsky, he's written some comedies and other short stories. Literary historians note that the theatre scene at the time was completely dominated by the French comedies like Molière, and not only did the fervor for them dimmed a little bit after the Napoleonic Wars, but also the structure of these comedies and the rules that you had to follow were incredibly rigid, and Griboyedov rebelled against it. Wit from Wit was not published, much less put on stage. It was deemed too free-minded and scandalous, but it was spread in the society. It spread like wildfire. By some estimations, it was copied by hand some 40,000 times. A true masterpiece. But Griboyedov needed to return to Tehran, and on the way there, 1826, he was arrested as a suspected decabrist. 3 months he spent arrested in St. Petersburg, but was proven innocent and let free. Apparently, one of the decabrists, when he was arrested, he was just naming names. I think he named something like 60 people at that time. Another anecdote from that time is that Griboyedov, when he was in prison, he wrote a very strongly worded letter to Nikolai I, either requesting a trial or to be let go. Thankfully, the letter never made it to Nikolai. It was returned to Griboyedov basically with a note, "What are you doing? You cannot do that." Griboyedov then returned to his diplomatic mission in Tehran, and he played a huge role in negotiating a treaty in the last Russian-Persian War. By all accounts, he was an incredibly talented diplomat. He was credited as an editor, if not a full-on author, of the Treaty of Turkmenchay, which was incredibly favorable for the Russian Empire. Griboyedov received various honors in St. Petersburg 1828 and was promoted to ambassador in Persia. On the way there, he married a Nino Chavchavadze in Tbilisi, with whom he only got to spend a few weeks. The embassy was located in Tabriz, and on January 30th, 1829, a crowd of thousands fanatics stormed the embassy, and Griboyedov was killed along with almost all other occupants of the embassy. The reasons for the massacre are somewhat blurry. The terms of the treaty are the obvious suspect, but historians also look for hidden motivations, some citing the tensions between Russian Empire and Britain over the influence in the region, and some call it a political assassination. This is not a history channel, so I'm not even going to try to untangle this, but the point is that this tragedy led to the loss of life, and notably that of Griboyedov. His young wife Nino lost their baby over the stress of the situation, so Griboyedov didn't even leave an heir. Griboyedov is buried in Tbilisi. His wife, she never remarried and remained faithful to him. She's buried next to him. She put a beautiful epitaph: "Your mind and deeds are immortal in the Russian memory, but why must my love outlive you?" Griboyedov is known somewhat as an author of a single play. This looks to be a complete compilation of his works. It includes some other plays, a few poems, and a few short stories, and even letters. I'm gonna be honest with you, I have not read anything else by him, but it is somewhat universally agreed that nothing that he's ever written even comes close to his War from Wit. War from Wit was written 1823 in the countryside during Griboyedov's brief break from his work in Persia. Anecdotally, he made so many corrections and changes to the work that he completely ran out of paper in the estate, and they had to send for more into town. We can assume that Griboyedov knew from the get-go that the play would never get published, but he did read it at the salons, various salons in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and so it found its success that way. It was copied by hand thousands of times, and soon enough the whole society knew of the play, and they also knew bits of it by heart, and they quoted them on a daily basis, which we still do to this day. It is probably the most quoted work in the Russian literature, but don't quote me on that. The first official publication of the work only happened in 1862. Let's briefly recap the plot before we really get into it. plot is rather simple. A young man named Chadsky returns to Moscow after 3 years of absence in hopes of proposing to his childhood sweetheart, Sofia. Sofia is now, however, very much in love with a man called Molchalin, who is her father's secretary, and she meets with him in secret in the night. Famusov almost catches them on the morning of Chadsky's arrival, but is completely distracted by Chadsky. Chadsky notices the coldness in Sofia and tries to figure out who her beloved is. Is it Molchalin or is it Colonel Skolazub, Famusov's preferred choice? Sofia faints in front of Chadsky when Molchalin is mildly injured, raising Chadsky's suspicions. But then after the conversation with Molchalin, whom he finds incredibly stupid and weaselly, he comes to the conclusion that Sofia cannot possibly love a man like that. That evening there is a ball at Famusov's place where multitudes of characters make an appearance. Chadsky tries to provoke a confession out of Sofia, quoting the fainting spell from earlier, and Sofia is very much afraid that he's going to expose her. In a conversation with one of the guests, she brings up that Chadsky's gone mad, and her conversation partner takes these words to be true and not a jest. The rumor of Chadsky's madness spreads amongst the guests. As the guests leave, Chadsky overhears them talking about his supposed madness, and he hides in one of the rooms that allows him to be a witness to the events that's going to happen later. Sofia sends her maid Lisa to fetch Molchalin to her. Molchalin makes his moves on Lisa and confesses that he doesn't love Sofia. Sofia overhears him and she orders him away to never see him again, or she will expose them both and ruin them both. Chadsky comes out of his hiding and confronts Sofia, accusing her of leading him on, but this commotion summons Famusov, who now believes that Sofia has been found in a compromising position with Chadsky. Chadsky laments his situation and summons a carriage and leaves. The comedy follows some of the rules set by the classical French comedy, something like Molière, but also comedy de l'art from Italy and also Shakespeare. The central conflict is rather traditional. It is a love triangle with an added flavor of societal conflict. A play normally follows a few rules, like the three unities, for example. It also normally starts with something that disrupts the peace and the natural order of things, and by the end of the play, this should be resolved and things should return to normal. And some of it is present in War from Wit. The play opens to a night date between Sofia and Molchalin, something completely inappropriate for the time period, and that's even before the arrival of the main disturbance in the form of Chadsky. The entire play is set in Famusov's house over the course of the day, and by the end the love triangle is resolved, but not in a classical way because the characters are not typical. A classical comedy has archetypes, something like the Harlequin and the ingenue, but in War from Wit they are kind of mixed and merged. Think about it. How should a traditional love triangle play out? There are two potential suitors. One is nice, he's quiet, a little bit shy. The other loud, arrogant, and a little bit rude. And the girl needs to choose between the two of them. And normally she should see the goodness in the quiet one because he is normally the better choice. That's your typical rom-com plot. But Griboyedov switches the suitors up. The quiet one turns out to be the false fiancé and a little bit of an asshole, and the loud one should have been the true love. Sofia as well takes a more active role in the narrative. She should be the ingenue type, virginal, passive, and pure, and some of it is still present in here, like the fainting spells, but she also accumulates some of the traits of a different comedy character type, the ingenue's maid. And the love triangle is resolved by neither man getting the girl. Because the love triangle is not the only conflict, there is also one exceptional man against the masses. This was succinctly put by Griboyedov in a letter to Katenin. In my play, there are 25 stupid people per one sensible one. First arguments against Chadsky being the smart one, or the sensible one, the intelligent one. There are subtle differences in these adjectives that elude me a little bit as non-native speaker, and in Russian it basically is one adjective for all of them. But basically the arguments against this position of him being the wit started pretty early with none other than Alexander Pushkin. In a letter to Vyasemsky, he writes, "Now a question, who is smart and what from wit? The answer is Griboyedov. Do you know what Chadsky is? Passionate, noble, and kind lad who spent some time with a really smart man, namely Griboyedov, in who absorbed his ideas, quips, and satire. Everything that he says is very smart, but who is he talking to? Famusov, Skalazul, Moscow Babushkas, Molchalin. It is unforgivable. The first trait of a smart person is to instantly know who you're dealing with and never preach to deaf ears, to Repetilov and such. A few things to bring up here. One of the reasons as to why Chadsky might not appear to be witty or smart comes back to the love triangle conflict. Chadsky's rational mind comes into the conflict with the irrational nature of love. He spends a lot of time trying to figure out who Sophia's beloved is, but he approaches it from the rational position. A smart woman like Sofia couldn't possibly love such a stupid man as Molchalin. Maybe it's Colonel Skalazub. He's kind of a better suitor after he almost wants to be a general. What a suitor he is. But Sofia fell in love with her heart and not her mind. And Chadsky needs to learn that the matters of love are never logical. But Chadsky himself acts irrationally. Some of it comes back to the genre. Chadsky can be interpreted as a comedic character, and the audience is expected to laugh at him. But his funniness comes from him behaving inappropriately to the situation. That's the basic rule of comedy, the contradiction. One juxtaposes the fake to real, illusion to reality, the expected to the actual. So when Chadsky launches into long monologues about Russia, duty, and service, and Skalazub only hears the bit about the uniforms, that is funny. There is also the discrepancy in intentions and actions. What did Chadsky come here to do? From the get-go, he says that he came back looking for happiness in Mary and Sofia, and moreover, he believes that he's entitled to it because of all his woes and all his wonderful qualities. But what is he doing? He monologues about Russia, antagonizes Sofia, insults her beloved, is elusive with Famusov as to his intentions, and insults the entire society. Everything he does moves him further away from his goal. And this difference in actions and words is comedy. This actually ties into a different motif of the play, the blindness and deafness of the characters. There is literally one deaf character, a Count Tugaухov, literally translates as not hard of hearing, but take a closer look. Not a single character listens or hears properly, and sometimes intentionally. If you look at Chekhov's plays, for example, something like The Cherry Orchard, their characters are talking at each other and nobody listens, and that's a feature, not a bug, by the way. But here it's done differently. Here, almost every character tells the truth to the best of their ability, and yet their conversation partner does not listen. From the get-go, Famusov catches Molchalin in the wee hours of the morning near Sofia's room, and he knows that something is up, but he decides to turn a blind eye. Sofia lists all the reasons why she loves Molchalin, but Chadsky only focuses on the bits that are important to him and comes to the wrong conclusion that Sofia does not love Molchalin. The entirety of Chadsky's woe comes from him being blind and not willing to see what is right in front of him. His wit is not enough to guarantee him happiness, and thus woe from wit. But also the difference of Chadsky's character from the rest of the society that we're going to talk about in a minute, that also makes him a tragic character, and that's why he flees from Famusov's place without finding the happiness that he thought was within grasp. And then there is the societal/ideological conflict of the current age and the age gone by. Chadsky has been away traveling for 3 years, and he has gone through the personal transformation. He has grown and evolved. And then he comes back home to Moscow and finds a society that not only has not grown, but seems to have devolved even. The play is set somewhere in 1823-24, in between the Napoleonic Wars and right before the Decabrist Revolt, and it manages to catch the zeitgeist of the time, where this mass of noblemen that is all false, patronizing, and corrupt, and there are a few individuals out there who find it wrong and they are ready for change. The play was written just on the eve of the Decabrist Revolt, so a lot of the sympathizers of that movement saw Chadsky as the Decabrist type. Now, as I've mentioned in the biography recap, we have no evidence that Griboyedov himself was part of these secret societies that we now call the Decabrists. Both the South and the North societies had their own ideas on how to transform Russia, but the main point that it was supposed to be a revolution. Griboyedov wasn't a revolutionary, but he also had ideas of how to change Russia. For example, he's written a project for the establishment of the Russian Transcaucasian Company in order to help Russia manage the lands that it's acquired in the south, in the current-day Georgia and Iran. It's very much based on the East India Company. So Griboyedov had his own ideas of how to improve Russia, they just didn't match with the decabrist ones. If you look at Wolfram Witt, Chadsky also has ideas, but they are not necessarily revolutionary. He sees the Russian greatness, he laments the influence of the foreigners on it, and he promotes mindfulness, intellectual independence, and deeds to the benefit of the country. He speaks against serfdom, corruption, subservience, and for the preservation of the Russian identity and for freedom of speech. And while Chadsky might not fully be a decabrist, he exhibits a lot of their traits. Yuri Lotman in his paper notes, contemporaries noted a certain talkativeness of decabrists. They also emphasized the sharpness and directness of their judgments, the categorical nature of their condemnations, the indecent nature of them from the point of view of societal norms, the constant desire to express their opinion bluntly without recognizing the ritual or the hierarchy of the societally approved behavior. The decabrist openly and publicly calls things by their proper names, rattles the ball and the society, because it's in this name that he sees the liberation of the man and the beginning of the transformation of the society. And isn't it all Chadsky? He is a character unwilling to conform. He speaks loudly about his own principle, while the society around him, just like Famusov, shuts their ears in order not to listen. The play also has a character, Repetilov, who is a farmhouse mirror reflection of Chadsky. He is a member of secret societies. He also expresses somewhat the same views that Chadsky does. In the play, he also repeats some of the actions that Chadsky does, like falling over or calling for the carriage and leaving into the night, basically. And he is the kind of the portrait, if you will, of the decabrist type of that time. Chadsky stands alone against the society that he despises, and one of the tools that Griboyedov uses to highlight it is character names. Character names are a trait of the classical comedy. It is better if your characters have them, and almost all of them have. Molchalin from the word molchat, to be silent, Repetilov from repetir, to repeat, Famusov from fama, and yet Chadsky does not mean anything. Even here, he is different from everybody else. In a way, Chadsky can be considered the superfluous man type that became quite popular in the Russian literature of the early 19th century. Your Eugene Onegin from Eugene Onegin by Alexander Pushkin or Pechorin from Hero of Our Time by Lermontov are the obvious suspects. They are all exceptional men that do not fit into their societies, but they are a lot more passive. They never come into full-on confrontation with the society around them. They are sometimes to be believed the leeches on the society, kind of bemoaning its mediocrity but not doing anything about it. Chadsky fits the bill, but only partially, and that's because of his active position. When confronted with Famusov society, he kind of expresses his position and he leaves. He's not necessarily changing it here, but he goes off to do that. Or at the very least, he removes himself from Famusov's society terrible influence. And what is this society? Well, historians and researchers say that it's a fairly accurate representation of the Moscow society of the time. The city that is rebuilding after the Napoleonic Wars, and the capital at the time was in St. Petersburg, so all of the career-oriented people were up there, and Moscow was more familiar. The corruption of its nature for my relatives, that I should put in a word, is rather warm and fuzzy. And this Moscow was also ruled by women. If you pay attention, the play is full of women in charge. It's Tatiana Yurievna that Molchalin talks about. It's Natalia Dmitrievna, who is the wife of Chadsky's old friend, who literally speaks for her husband. It's Khlostova, it's Countess Tugaukhova. Even the last line of the play, it's Famusov lamenting as to what the Countess Maria Alexeyevna is going to say about it. Moscow was ruled by women, And some of the characters in the play had real-life prototypes of women who could provide some backing and protection. Keep in mind that women in Russia at the time could own property and funds, so widows were incredibly powerful, even if they only had to rely on the funds that were in their name. So all these old women, these babushkas, had quite a bit of say and sway in the societal circles, but also governmental assignments and sometimes even military assignments. So the advice that Molchanin gives Chadsky might not be that unfounded, even if Chadsky doesn't want to grovel. And then there is Sofia. For a young unmarried woman of the time, she has quite a bit of agency. Yes, she puts a stake on a wrong man, but can we blame her? Love is blind after all. Otherwise, she is smart, and more importantly, she is in control of her own fate. She risks a lot in her affair with Molchanin, but in order to protect them, she is ruthless. The rumor about Chadsky's madness starts with her unintentionally, but she lets it spread because it's gonna protect her if Chadsky decides to expose them. And when Molchanin's true colors are revealed, she is the one to send him away. She is once again willing to risk it all, but this decision is going to be hers. Famusov in the end threatens to send her away, but I'm not worried about her. She's got a good head on her shoulders. She's gonna be fine. And wiser. Sofia is often compared to a different woman in literature of that time period, to Tatiana Larina and Eugene Onegin. And it is fun to actually imagine them as friends. That's a fanfic idea for you. I also need to say that the play is written in that beautiful Russian language of the time period, and it is the most quoted play. Just like all English speakers have a little bit of Shakespeare in them, all the Russian speakers are at least 1% Wolfram Wit. Wikipedia lists 30 different phrases from Wolfram Wit that became part of our day-to-day languages. Other sources name something like 60 to 100. And keep in mind, it's 100-page play in verse. Also, the fact that it is in verse helps a lot. It makes it more digestible. It's written in yamb and in so-called free verse, which allows for different length of lines and indentions, and that actually makes for interesting choices in dialogue, for example, like here. The influence that Griboyedov had with this one play on the Russian language could be compared with what Alexander Pushkin did, except Griboyedov only wrote one play when Pushkin's written hundreds of pieces. The last question is, does the play hold up? I think it does. It is a product of a very specific time period, but at the same time, the questions and the problems that it raises are somewhat universal. One of the things is always the question of whether or not Chadsky is actually smart. And it is somewhat universally agreed now that he is, but it takes a little bit of analysis to get there, because my initial knee-jerk reaction was very much akin to Pushkin's, that he might be intelligent, but he lacks the emotional intelligence and the tact. So I encourage you to read the play and make up your own mind about it. And I also genuinely find the play funny. There are lines in there that I laughed at quite genuinely, so it still works. My absolute favorite bit in there is at the ball when Countess Tugaukhova, who has 6 unmarried daughters, notices a new face, a new bachelor, Chadsky, and she sends her husband there to invite Chadsky for tea. But as soon as she hears that Chadsky is not rich, she instantly needs to call her husband back, like, abort, stop it. And it's funny. I don't know what to tell you, it's just funny. I don't know if they play it anywhere in the world these days. God knows it's even difficult to find a decent production in Moscow, but at least read it. It is a perfect example of an early Russian comedy, and it truly deserves the title of a true masterpiece.